I woke to the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the faint sunlight filtering through the blinds. The familiar scent of brewed coffee and toast drifted up from the kitchen, but it did nothing to calm the knot of unease in my stomach. I lay there a moment longer, tracing the silver bracelet around my wrist, a gift from Odessa, my loyal friend who had always seen me even when the rest of my family hadn't. It was small, simple, and unassuming, much like my presence in this house, quiet, overlooked, almost invisible. I wondered not for the first time if today would be any different. Would anyone acknowledge me, or would I vanish into the background again? I swung my legs over the side of the bed and carefully packed a few personal items into a small bag, things I might need if the day didn't go as planned. My sister had a way of commanding attention without trying, and I had learned long ago that modesty and diligence often went unnoticed in this household. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. Tired eyes, tight jaw, a quiet determination that had carried me through so many silent betrayals. I reminded myself that my worth wasn't defined by their laughter or their acknowledgement. It was mine to claim, quietly if necessary. Downstairs, the familiar clamour of the morning greeted me. The living room smelled of fresh pastries and perfume. My sister's voice, bright and unrestrained, carried over the hum of chatter as she joked with my parents. I tried to slip into the conversation, offering a small comment about the new painting in the hallway, but my words barely registered. She laughed a little too loudly, and everyone's attention swiveled toward her. A pang of irritation rose, tempered by the calm I forced into myself. Observing, planning, waiting, that was my way, the only way I could remain unbroken in a house that treated me as invisible. The brunch table filled with relatives and friends, all murmuring and shifting seats. Conversations about lottery winnings began bubbling to the surface, whispers about who would do what with sudden wealth, speculations that made my chest tighten. My sister, radiant and smug, commanded the room without saying much. I tried again to contribute, mentioning a charity initiative I had quietly supported for months. She waved her hand, dismissing it with a laugh. "Oh, that's cute," she said, "but let's focus on the real news." Real news, it seemed, was always about her. I kept my voice measured, my thoughts sharp. If they overlooked me now, they would regret it later. I had a mind of my own, and a patience forged by years of neglect. Then came the announcement that turned my stomach. She held up the lottery ticket, numbers verified on her phone, and declared she had won $130 million. The room erupted. Applause, gasps, excited chatter. It was as if she had single-handedly created every possibility of admiration and opportunity in the house. I stood there, chest tight, seeing the invisible thread of my own efforts unravel. Every dish I had washed, every quiet gesture I had made to keep the household running smoothly, it counted for nothing now. The bracelet brushed my wrist, grounding me, a reminder that some loyalty, some integrity, could not be bought or stolen. The next words hit harder than any slap could. She turned to me, eyes cold and triumphant, and said, "You should go. Pack your things. I don't need you here anymore." Silence followed, thick and heavy. My parents shifted uncomfortably, some offering faint glances, others looking away. Approval, tacit and undeniable, gleamed in my sister's expression. I felt my stomach drop, disbelief mixing with anger, humiliation clawing its way into every nerve. My hands trembled slightly as I gathered my few belongings, clothes, personal effects. The silver bracelet carefully slipped into my pocket, each item a reminder of my worth and my connections beyond this house. Outside, the air hit me like a cold wave, sunlight blinding against the smooth walls of my former sanctuary. I stood there, suitcase in hand, watching as my family carried on behind the glass doors. The house that had always been my cage now felt like a fortress she commanded. A mixture of hurt and simmering resolve coursed through me. I replayed memories of being overlooked, of my efforts dismissed, of quiet sacrifices that went unthanked. And yet, beneath it all, a spark lingered, a quiet, potent awareness that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. I debated within myself whether to confront her, to argue, to demand recognition. But I felt the familiar weight of strategy settle over my thoughts. Patience had always been my shield, and now it was my weapon. I recalled moments of subtle observation, times I had noted her weaknesses, her patterns of indulgence, the way she underestimated those who seemed meek. This humiliation, this forced removal would not break me. It would sharpen me. As I stood on the curb, gripping my suitcase, my mind raced with plans, half-formed, each one a seed of potential. The injustice, the betrayal, the bitter sting of invisibility. These were my fuel, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that the silver bracelet, cool against my skin, would remind me that loyalty, integrity, and intelligence could not be stripped away by anyone. I inhaled, squared my shoulders, and took the first step down the driveway, carrying not just my belongings, but a quiet promise. Today was a turning point. Today I would begin to claim what had always been mine, silently, deliberately, with patience and cunning. The morning had betrayed me, yes, but I had not betrayed myself. The moment I stepped onto the sunlit sidewalk, suitcase in hand, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on me. The air smelled faintly of freshly cut grass and exhaust fumes, a familiar mix that usually brought comfort, but today felt alien, almost accusatory. Faces I knew passed by, neighbours, mail carriers, joggers, and I caught glimpses of curiosity, indifference, and subtle judgment. Each glance reminded me that my presence here was precarious, fragile, as if the world had decided to overlook me entirely. My mind replayed the morning, my sister's triumphant announcement, the sting of being sent away as if I were some disposable shadow of the family. Memories of unnoticed efforts, mending leaks in the kitchen, preparing holiday meals alone, quietly helping relatives, flashed unbidden, each one a small wound I carried silently. Despite the humiliation, a quiet resolve began to crystallize. Survival first, then strategy. I needed to assess, observe, and plan. Where would I go? Who could I rely on? Every step down the familiar streets of Houston felt like a measured test. Each storefront, each passerby, a reminder that the world still moved, indifferent yet full of potential opportunities. I found refuge in a small coffee shop, tucked between a laundromat and a corner bookstore, the kind of place unnoticed by most yet welcoming to those who needed a temporary haven. The barista gave me a nod, a polite acknowledgement that allowed me space without intrusion. I slid into a corner booth, the worn leather seat familiar beneath me, and took a moment to breathe. The silver bracelet pressed against my wrist, grounding me, a tactile reminder of loyalty and perseverance. I observed the room cautiously, noting the movements of strangers, the subtle interactions that spoke of alliances, conflicts, and hierarchy. Here, in the modest warmth of hums and murmurs, I could think clearly. The contrast between my understated presence and my sister's ostentation this morning gnawed at me, but it also sharpened my awareness. She had wealth, yes, but she lacked the patience, the insight, and the subtle intelligence I had cultivated in years of quiet vigilance. Scrolling through my phone, I stumbled across a social media post from my sister, flaunting her winnings with an almost theatrical arrogance. She dismissed family opinions as trivial, her captions brimming with entitlement and subtle derision. Humiliation tightened around my chest, but beneath it a spark of calculation ignited. Her power over the family wasn't just about money, it extended to control, manipulation, and the ability to rewrite narratives at will. I could feel the seeds of strategy beginning to take root, ideas forming about how to counter her, to reclaim a measure of agency.
Comparing her flamboyance to my quiet, deliberate composure, I realized that advantage could lie in restraint and intelligence, that my observations, patience, and insight were tools she had
underestimated entirely. If they think I'm powerless, I whispered to myself, they haven't seen me yet. Later, I ran into someone I hadn't expected, a cousin who had always recognized the value in what I did behind the scenes. Their presence felt like a lifeline, validating my worth, reminding me that I wasn't entirely invisible. We talked quietly over coffee, their perspective peeling back the layers of my sister's manipulations, highlighting inconsistencies and opportunities I had yet to notice. I took mental notes, cataloguing behaviors and patterns, what she said, what she avoided, who enabled her. The reflection of myself in the cafe window caught my eye, bracelet gleaming softly in the morning light, and I felt a renewed sense of resilience. I was no longer just a victim. I was becoming an observer, a strategist, quietly assembling the pieces for what might come next. I spent hours mapping possibilities, from subtle observation to careful collection of information. Each humiliating memory, each slight I had endured, became data points for future decisions. I considered the risks of confrontation, the advantages of patience, the value of strategic silence. Holding the bracelet, I traced the edges of my small bag, grounding myself in the tangible reality of my possessions and the metaphorical weight of the knowledge I now carried. I wasn't rushing. There was no room for recklessness. Each step would be deliberate, each word measured, each move calculated. My empowerment wasn't born of impulse but of insight, tempered by experience and fortified by quiet determination. And then, as I sipped the last of my coffee, I saw her, across the street, moving casually among the pedestrians, entirely unaware of my presence, yet radiating the arrogance that had fueled her morning triumph. A surge of controlled anger rose, but it was tempered by patience. I traced every step she took in my mind, noting her gestures, the way she glanced around, the subtle sway of her head as she passed familiar faces. 30 minutes ago, she had thought she had all the power. Now the game had just begun. I sat back, tightened my grip on the bracelet, and waited, every fibre of my being alert, ready for the moment when I would act, when her oversight would become my advantage. The streets of Houston, once ordinary and mundane, had become the stage for the next chapter in a carefully plotted response. I would not be invisible forever. I settled into the corner of my temporary refuge, a quiet apartment borrowed from a friend, the sunlight filtering lazily through the blinds. My notebook lay open on the small table, pen poised, phone buzzing quietly beside me. Every detail mattered, and today I was an observer, cataloguing the intricacies of a family dynamic I had always been forced to navigate invisibly. I scrolled through social media, neighbors' posts, community bulletins, anything that might reveal my sister's patterns, her preferences, the way she maneuvered to assert dominance. Each post, each story was a clue. The way she spent lavishly, the small gestures meant to signal status, the subtle dismissal of anyone who might challenge her newly minted authority. I compared them against my own contributions, long overlooked, and the contrast sharpened my focus. My past sacrifices, the meals I prepared quietly, the emotional labor I carried unnoticed, all formed a mental map of inequities I could now trace with clarity. I noted potential allies and weak points, cataloguing inconsistencies and openings that could later be leveraged. As the afternoon stretched on, I noticed a pattern. She had a way of publicly belittling anyone who disagreed with her or questioned her choices, and this wasn't subtle. A post popped up, a video from last night, where she dismissed a cousin's suggestion with a laugh that dripped with condescension. My chest tightened, the familiar sting of frustration mixing with humiliation. Yet I didn't react impulsively. Instead, I studied the footage, noting her expressions, her tone, her gestures. The flashy watch on her wrist caught the sunlight, glinting like a neon sign of entitlement, a stark contrast to my understated, thoughtful approach. I allowed myself a moment to recognize the power in restraint, the advantage in observation. Every insult, every dismissive glance was data, and I was collecting it meticulously. My strategy was taking shape, built on patience and intelligence rather than confrontation. I leaned back and assessed my personal stakes. Confronting her directly could backfire, but doing nothing would allow her unchecked influence to grow. My reflections wove past slights and current dynamics into a mental framework for future action. I texted my ally from earlier, sharing observations and confirming suspicions, their responses offering validation and reinforcing my confidence. Glancing at my silver bracelet, I felt a renewed sense of inner strength, a reminder that my quiet resilience had value and purpose. Later, an unexpected message arrived, revealing a secret partnership my sister had formed without informing anyone, a hidden financial decision that exposed a crack in her otherwise polished facade. The revelation sparked cautious optimism. Here was evidence of her overconfidence, a vulnerability that, if approached strategically, could be used to restore balance. I photographed the relevant information, secured notes in my notebook, and allowed myself a quiet satisfaction. Her arrogance was tangible, her missteps visible, and my observations were building toward a future revelation. By the evening, my plan was beginning to crystallize. I mentally rehearsed potential conversations, public encounters, ways to subtly highlight her inconsistencies without overtly challenging her. The bracelet on my wrist, the pen in my hand, and the notebook open before me were anchors in this process, a grounding in both reality and resolve. Each piece of data collected, each observation noted, added to my growing empowerment. Then I saw her emerging from a nearby community meeting, unaware that I was watching, entirely absorbed in her own presence. A surge of controlled tension gripped me. Every step she took, every gesture I catalogued silently, preparing for the moment I could act with precision. The streets of Houston were no longer just a backdrop. They had become the chessboard upon which I would play my first calculated moves. Every detail mattered, and I was ready. Every move she made, I was already one step ahead. The next play was mine. I spread my notes across the small cafe table, each scribble and screenshot a piece of the puzzle I was piecing together. The late afternoon light softened against the windows, but inside my mind was sharp, calculating, patient. I reviewed every observation from the past days, her public dismissals, her ostentatious displays, the way she subtly manipulated family members into her orbit. Each moment she underestimated me, each laugh at someone else's expense, was a data point. Patience had become my strategy. Impulsive confrontation could undo everything I had meticulously tracked. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the aroma ground me while my thoughts ran through potential scenarios. There were neighbors I could count on, distant relatives who could be quietly tipped off, but each move required discretion. I focused on small anchors around me. My journal, the pen I had carried since the morning, the silver bracelet on my wrist, a tangible reminder of my worth and resilience. Every reflection reinforced a critical truth. Timing would determine the impact of my next steps. By late afternoon, I allowed myself a subtle test. I joined a casual street-side conversation, asking indirect questions about family matters, subtly probing for inconsistencies. Her reactions came via social media updates and gossip carried through the neighborhood. Nothing obvious, nothing confrontational, but enough to confirm patterns of arrogance and predictable responses. I caught myself giving a quiet nod to an unseen observer, a small gesture unnoticed by her but symbolic for me. A silent claim on the control I had begun to reclaim. Each moment of restraint, Each calculated interaction sharpened my strategy. I could escalate at the right time, but not before assessing all variables. As shadows lengthened, I reflected on her vulnerabilities. Ostentation masked overconfidence, financial decisions lacked discretion, social cues were predictable. I ran scenarios in my mind, considering moral boundaries, weighing the consequences of exposure. Her lavish displays and careless handling of sensitive information were glaring contrasts to my cautious, methodical approach. I noted the exact moments she let pride overshadow prudence, marking openings I could exploit. Then an unexpected ally entered the picture, a distant cousin who had noticed her manipulation long before anyone else. Over a brief conversation, they offered insights and subtle confirmations of behaviors I had suspected, lending credibility to my observations. I listened, weighed the trustworthiness, and allowed the information to crystallize within my plan. A shared memory and the feel of my bracelet anchored my resolve. Every detail fed into a growing, deliberate framework, positioning me for the moment when I could act decisively. As evening approached, the pieces coalesced. I outlined my next steps mentally, sequencing subtle interventions, gauging reactions, and preparing for the eventual confrontation that would leverage everything I had learned. The cafe's quiet hum became the backdrop for a mind engaged in tactical orchestration. My notebook, my pen, the bracelet, they were no longer mere objects, but instruments in a strategy that blended patience with precision. Then I saw it, the moment I had been waiting for. She was about to reveal sensitive information in a public setting, her misstep imminent. My heart quickened, a controlled pulse of anticipation. Every observation, every note, every ounce of patience led to this point. I straightened in my seat, focusing entirely, ready to act when the timing was perfect. This was the moment I would turn calculation into action. I would not let it slip. I sat at the corner table of the local cafe, journal open, pen poised, tracing the lines I had meticulously drawn from the past few days. Each note, each observation formed a roadmap of her arrogance and blind spots. My mind replayed the subtle dismissals, the laughs she drew at the expense of others, and the careless flaunting of her newfound power. I rehearsed over and over the timing of questions, the tone of voice, the precise moments I would assert myself without revealing impatience or vulnerability. Patience was my weapon. Impulsivity could undo everything I had quietly orchestrated. Around me, the cafe hummed with the ordinary chatter of mid-evening life, yet my focus was razor-sharp, measuring every potential witness and ally, both visible and hidden. I straightened my notebook, touching the silver bracelet on my wrist as a silent reminder. I was ready, anchored in my own worth and resilience, prepared to step from observation into action. Later, at the family home, I began weaving myself into the social fabric, subtle but deliberate. I asked pointed questions during casual conversations, weaving truths that exposed inconsistencies without ever directly confronting her. Her micro-reactions, a fleeting eyebrow raise, a tightening of lips, were data points I absorbed with satisfaction. Each carefully chosen word and gesture sent ripples through her carefully constructed ego, just enough to unsettle without alarming. My internal monologue balanced patience against impulsive retaliation, a constant calibration of timing and impact. I recognized that the true assertion of presence came from the quiet, strategic demonstration of control, a lesson in intelligence over sheer force. I watched the dynamics around me closely, observing family members and acquaintances as they responded to these subtle interventions. Some looked on, unconsciously shifting their attention, potential allies forming in my mind for later, more visible support. Every laugh, every approving glance she received, and the blind spots in her overconfidence were marked carefully. My journal became more than notes. It was a map of influence and leverage, a blueprint for what was to come. Confidence rose quietly as I understood the social chessboard unfolding before me, each move calculated and deliberate. Then a minor but unexpected source provided information that could alter the trajectory of my plan. The words delivered almost in passing offered clarity and validation for the strategy I had been forming. I absorbed the details methodically, weighing the risks against the potential for impact. My bracelet felt heavier somehow, a tactile anchor as clarity settled in my mind. This small insight sharpened the first significant move I would make, turning accumulated observations into actionable strategy. By nightfall, my plan had taken shape. I mapped out the sequence of public and private interventions, ensuring every action served the greater purpose of asserting presence and exposing overconfidence. Every detail had been rehearsed mentally: words, gestures, timing, and audience reaction. The cafe table, the pen, the bracelet. They were instruments of a deliberate and quiet power, signaling my transition from observer to active participant. I could feel the shift within myself, a controlled energy ready to be channeled with precision. And then I saw the opening. She was about to make a misstep, small but significant, in the presence of the very witnesses I had been cataloguing. My pulse quickened, not with panic, but with focused anticipation. Every observation, every note, every ounce of patience had led to this opportunity. I straightened, breathing deliberately, aligning my actions with the strategy I had crafted so carefully. Everything depended on this moment, and I would not falter. The late afternoon sunlight spilled through the family room windows, catching the edges of polished surfaces and illuminating the subtle tension lingering in the air. I positioned myself near the doorway, notebook tucked under my arm, eyes scanning her every move. My sister moved through the room as if it belonged solely to her, laughing too loudly, gesturing with the careless confidence of someone who believed no one could challenge her. I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar surge of calm determination, the kind that comes from knowing your own worth, from having watched and waited. Every detail counted. The way she sipped her drink, the small smirk when a cousin laughed at her jest, the flash of her expensive watch catching the light. Each micro moment became data in my mind, a matrix of leverage, waiting for the right opening. I rehearsed phrases silently, the cadence of my voice, the precision of questions that could unsettle without exposing me. Timing mattered more than volume. Subtlety was the most potent form of power I had cultivated. I approached, notebook in hand, making my presence visible without threatening. I noticed something interesting about the project you mentioned earlier, I said, my voice steady, deliberate. Her smile faltered, eyes narrowing just slightly. The room seemed to tilt for a moment, family members shifting uneasily, sensing a fracture in her usual dominance. I presented my observations in measured tones, facts rather than accusations, questions that hinted at gaps she hadn't considered. She reacted instantly, defensive, brushing off my comments with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. I held my ground, steady, letting the tension settle into a controlled discomfort she couldn't ignore. The subtlety mattered. I was asserting presence, establishing authority without overt aggression, each word a chess move in the growing game. I observed reactions, noting who glanced my way with curiosity, who remained neutral, and who might be silently supportive. Micro signals from my sister revealed cracks in her armor, irritation flickering in her expression, a slight tightening of her jaw, eyes darting to allies she assumed would back her without question. I catalogued these moments mentally, connecting patterns, anticipating her next moves. My notebook, once a repository of observation, now became a guide for calculated engagement, each line a reference point for timing and leverage. The stakes felt tangible. I could sense the room holding its breath, waiting to see how the subtle confrontation would unfold. Then came an unexpected ripple. She attempted to regain control. A small public act of mockery aimed to redirect attention away from my interventions. A flippant comment, a subtle jab, thrown with casual ease meant to undermine. I paused, eyes steady, letting the words hang in the air. My hand touched the bracelet on my wrist, the familiar silver weight grounding me, reminding me of past resilience and careful strategy. I assessed swiftly, escalate, wait, pivot, calculated patience, always patience. I chose measured observation, letting the moment reveal further opportunities rather than forcing a response. She believed she had the upper hand, yet each attempt to intimidate me only confirmed the advantage I had been quietly cultivating. By early evening, I had mapped the next level actions in my mind, public and private moves sequenced with precision, aimed at exposing subtle missteps without risking the perception of impulsivity. Each symbolic cue, my notebook, pen, bracelet, anchored my focus, a tactile manifestation of control and strategic foresight. I felt the transformation solidify. No longer merely reacting, I was now actively steering the outcome. Every word, every gesture, and every pause was aligned with the plan, turning observation into deliberate influence. The anticipation surged quietly, a tension that promised a shift in the established hierarchy. And then the opening appeared, a moment so precise, a gap in her confidence wide enough to step forward. I drew a controlled breath, heart steady, mind alert. The entire day's careful calibration had led here. I felt excitement, not recklessness, coursing through me, calculated courage. I could change the trajectory in a single measured move. Every eye in the room, every subtle observation was mine to wield. One wrong action, one misstep, and the delicate balance could tip. But I had prepared for this. My moment was coming and I would not falter. The evening air carried a cool tension as I settled into the family study, notebook open, pen poised, mind sharpening with every observation. The events of earlier in the day had already shifted the balance, yet the room felt fragile, as if any misstep could tip it irreversibly. My sister's posture, her calculated smiles, the subtle nods toward family members, each gesture a test, a probe, a declaration of assumed control. I studied them all, noting patterns, vulnerabilities, and moments where overconfidence betrayed cracks in her armor. I rehearsed potential responses, weighing the timing of each word, the cadence of my questions, the gentle yet firm way I could assert authority without appearing reactive. Neutral family members shifted in their chairs, some curious, others apprehensive, all sensing the undercurrent of a changing dynamic. My pulse stayed measured, anticipation built quietly, tension threaded through every glance exchanged in the room. I understood that escalation now had to be calculated, deliberate, and uncompromising in precision. Then came a minor setback, a small public jab from my sister intended to undermine my credibility, a seemingly casual remark aimed to diminish my contributions, a sly smile that invited others to laugh along. I felt the familiar flash of frustration, but it was contained, redirected into observation and strategy. Reacting impulsively would only expose me. Instead, I let the words hang, reading the room, reading her. I noted who faltered in attention, who paused, who caught the subtle shift. I allowed the slight sting to strengthen resolve rather than erode it. My mind catalogued the incident, a piece in a larger puzzle, an opportunity for a measured counter, a way to signal readiness without revealing all cards. Each subtle movement and pause in the room became a guidepost, reinforcing my awareness that the social chessboard was as critical as the direct confrontation. Strategizing the countermove required careful sequencing. I identified potential allies and neutral observers whose quiet support could amplify influence at the right moment. I envisioned subtle exposures, small truths revealed indirectly, carefully timed to highlight flaws without overt accusation. My pen traced lines in the notebook, symbolic gestures anchoring my focus as I mentally rehearsed public and private interventions. Every detail mattered: timing, phrasing, audience attention, and the interplay of visible and hidden influence. I could sense the growing tension and the anticipation within myself, the quiet empowerment that came from transforming observation into action. I was no longer simply reacting. I was orchestrating, shaping, and subtly steering the unfolding dynamic. And then the key weakness appeared. Something overlooked, a miscalculation, a brief lapse in her careful presentation, a tell that betrayed overconfidence. The realization sparked a cautious optimism within me. Her confidence wavered ever so slightly, compelling a reaction that I was prepared to exploit. I recorded it silently, anchored by my bracelet, my notebook, the tangible symbols of persistence and foresight. The room's energy shifted subtly. Family members began to sense that control was no longer unilateral. My sister, startled by the unexpected vulnerability, offered micro-expressions of doubt, fleeting but sufficient. I held the pause, letting the tension settle, knowing that this moment could be the turning point in the strategic sequence I had been constructing. As I reflected on the day, the challenges and the subtle triumphs, a steady resolve cemented within me, past experiences, overlooked efforts, invisible contributions, all of it coalesced into clarity and confidence. I mentally prepared for the upcoming confrontations, rehearsing patience and precision, aware that the climax of these maneuvers was approaching. Every small observation, every interaction had been a stepping stone to this stage where strategy met opportunity. The anticipation hummed in my veins, and I felt the controlled surge of empowerment, ready to guide the next decisive moments. And then I saw it, a fleeting opening, a moment pregnant with potential, where a single, well-timed intervention could shift the entire dynamic in my favor. My chest tightened with a mixture of exhilaration and careful calculation. I could sense that the game teetered on the edge of transformation, and the next move would define everything. I steadied my breath, mind poised, heart aligned with measured courage, fully aware that the tipping point had arrived. I stepped into the living room with a deliberate calm, carrying the weight of every observation, every note, every subtle maneuver from the past days. The family gathered around the dining area, the low hum of conversation punctuated by occasional laughter and clinking of glasses. My mind moved faster than the room, assessing, recalculating, seeking the exact moment to intervene without losing control. Timing was everything. Too soon and my sister could deflect. Too late and the momentum would be gone. I positioned myself where I could observe her reactions, where neutral eyes might notice, where subtle gestures could signal intent without overt aggression. My bracelet brushed against my wrist, a tangible reminder of patience, resilience, and the quiet strength I had cultivated. I drew in a deep breath, letting the anticipation settle into focused energy. Then my sister acted, a sudden, bold move designed to undermine me publicly. She directed a pointed comment toward me, a smile that suggested superiority, and invited others to laugh or nod in agreement. The room shifted. I felt the sting of surprise and the familiar edge of frustration, but I held steady. Reacting hastily would undo days of strategic build-up. Instead, I absorbed the moment, reading every micro-expression, every slight pause, every glance of doubt or curiosity from family members. I weighed responses, options, and subtle ways to redirect the energy in my favor. My mind was clear. I felt the pivot point approaching. The social terrain itself was a tool, and I intended to wield it with precision. I moved with deliberate care, using calm words, controlled tone, and carefully placed gestures to assert my presence. References to past events, subtle facts, and quiet reminders of overlooked contributions positioned me as both credible and assertive. I allowed evidence of her missteps to surface naturally, letting the room witness rather than forcing the confrontation. Family members' expressions shifted, some in surprise, others in acknowledgement of the imbalance subtly correcting itself. Every nod, every slight intake of breath, every pause became part of the narrative I was crafting. I felt the power of intelligence, composure, and strategic timing converge into an unspoken assertion of authority. Then the pivotal moment arrived. I revealed a misstep my sister had assumed would remain hidden, a manipulation, an oversight, a false claim. I presented it with calm certainty, letting the facts speak while maintaining a measured voice. The reaction was immediate. Eyes widened, conversation faltered, laughter died in mouths. She blinked, caught off guard, her confidence visibly shaken. The family absorbed the shift, their understanding of events aligning with my revelation. The bracelet on my wrist, the notes in my hand, the subtle nods to my allies, all had converged into this moment of public vindication. Relief and triumph coursed through me, steady and contained, the satisfaction of strategic patience fully realized. As the echoes of revelation settled, I allowed myself a quiet reflection. I considered every previous slight, every overlooked contribution, every subtle moment of humiliation, and how patience and intelligence had transformed them into leverage and empowerment. Family dynamics had shifted. Lessons were learned, and I felt a deep, calm satisfaction, knowing the confrontation had been resolved without unnecessary conflict. There was a newfound respect, subtle but undeniable, circulating through the room. Yet, even as triumph settled, I remained alert, aware that the final threads of influence and consequence still required careful attention. I could feel one last subtle ripple of uncertainty lingering, a reminder that vigilance would ensure that justice, clarity, and integrity held the final word. The morning sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, softening the edges of tension that had defined the house for days. I moved quietly through the family home, observing the aftermath of the confrontation. Faces that had once been tight with doubt or discomfort now revealed subtle shifts. My sister, still visibly unsettled, offered a half-smile tinged with resignation. Some relatives approached with tentative warmth, seeking reconciliation, while others kept their distance, unsure how to navigate the new balance. I took note of each reaction, aware of the delicate social equilibrium I had influenced without forcing it. There was a sense of relief in the air, yet it was cautious, a recognition that trust and respect needed time to settle. I reflected internally, revisiting the lessons embedded in every past slight, every overlooked effort, and every careful move that had brought me here. Each observation reinforced that patience, strategy, and measured assertiveness had crafted not just a victory, but a foundation for lasting respect. Later, as I sorted through some old family documents and notes, a last-minute revelation emerged, an overlooked letter outlining portions of the estate and clarifying intentions that had remained ambiguous. It wasn't explosive, but it carried weight, subtle recognition of contributions I had made, assurances that fairness would be maintained, and hints at considerations I had not previously known. The discovery sparked a mix of surprise and determination. I weighed the ethical choice of whether to disclose everything immediately or integrate it into ongoing family understanding. Watching my sister's reaction as I considered the implications, I sensed her awareness shifting. Astonishment, slight guilt, and tentative acceptance rippled through the room, creating a quiet, tangible tension that underscored the lingering importance of fairness. It was a subtle, yet powerful confirmation that integrity had the final word. By midday, I retreated briefly to a nearby park, letting the fresh air and open space carry away residual tension. Reflection came easily in this quiet, observing the resilience that had grown in me over weeks of careful maneuvering. I considered the personal growth born from standing firm without succumbing to anger or impulsive reaction. Resilience, intelligence, and self-worth had become not abstract qualities, but practical tools I had exercised deliberately. The weight of past humiliation felt lighter now, reframed as lessons rather than scars. In that space, I allowed myself to acknowledge triumph while releasing lingering resentment, recognizing the empowerment that comes from measured action and clarity of intent. Returning home, I enacted a small, symbolic closure. I handed a personal memento, a shared family photograph long neglected, to my sister with quiet words, acknowledging our intertwined histories while signaling mutual respect. The gesture was simple, unembellished, yet carried the weight of justice and recognition. My sister accepted it, her eyes reflecting a mix of humility and understanding. The house, once tense and fraught, now carried a quieter rhythm. Boundaries were respected, contributions recognized, and dignity quietly restored. The act was not theatrical, but deeply satisfying, a reminder that empowerment need not rely on spectacle. Looking forward, I envisioned family interactions colored by lessons learned. Patience, strategy, and intelligence would guide me, ensuring fairness while maintaining personal boundaries. I allowed for minor imperfections and unresolved issues, understanding that life's balance is maintained not by perfection, but by deliberate, thoughtful action. There was a calmness in planning, a sense of continuity and purpose, coupled with awareness that growth extends beyond this particular story. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows across the yard, I paused, feeling the quiet power of standing firm with integrity. It was a victory not measured by humiliation or retribution, but by self-respect, clarity, and enduring influence. I finally understood that standing firm with integrity was the most powerful victory of all,